Don't allow anybody to pull you so low as to make you hate them. Don't allow anybody to cause you to lose your self-respect to the point that you do not struggle for justice. However young you are, you have a responsibility to seek to make your nation a better nation in which to live. You have a responsibility to seek to make life better for everybody. And so you must be involved in the struggle for freedom and justice. Now, in this struggle for freedom and justice, there are many constructive things that we all can do and that we all must do. And so our slogan must not be burn, baby, burn. It must be build, baby, build. Organize, baby, organize. Yes, our slogan must be learn, baby, learn, so that we can earn, baby, earn. And with a powerful commitment, I believe that we can transform dark yesterdays of injustice into bright tomorrows of justice and humanity. Let us keep going toward the goal of selfhood, toward the realization of the dream of brotherhood.
We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now in the unfolding conundrum of life and history. There is such a time as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. Dr. King, as a man of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, never took any backward steps in the face of injustice. Dr. King always pressed forward in the face of discrimination. Without hesitation, he boldly confronted institutionalized racism and voter suppression. Therefore, to truly honor Dr. King's legacy in this current political, economic, and cultural and social landscape of America, we must fight against injustice in all forms. Dr. King, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, Justice Thurgood Marshall, Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, Dean Charles Hamilton Houston, Ernest Withers, are demanding that we take our collective energy to ensure that the promise of America is realized by all Americans, regardless of the color of their skin or their sexual orientation. Today is the day that urgency calls upon us to fight against injustice no matter where we find it. Silence is not an option in 2018. So we must stand up and demand educational equality. We must fight against police brutality. We must fight against discrimination. We must fight against health disparities. And we must fight against targeted voter suppression that keeps people from the polls based on the color of their skin. We must fight. We must fight. Stephon Clark, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, and Eric Gardner and Jonathan Tobas are saying to us from heaven that if you love Dr. King, keep on fighting. If you love me, keep on struggling. Never, ever give up. So as we say in the House of Alpha, we'll fight till hell freezes over, and then we'll fight on the ice Today, this fraternity, the fraternity of Brother King, sang on the place where he died that you did not die in vain, my brother. 50 years later, we shall fight till freedom is enjoyed by all Americans. God bless his legacy, and God bless Dr. King.
Yes, my name is Joanne Humphreys Favors, and I am a registered nurse still, and have had several professions during my adult years. I started out in nursing and spent many, many years at Erlanger in management positions. And I was associate professor at Chattanooga State, associate professor of nursing, and went on to become elected as the first African-American female to the Hamilton County Commission. And later, after 6.5 years after winning 2 terms there, I was encouraged by many constituents to run for a state seat. And I was elected to the state house seat, the 29th district, and I spent 14 years there before I retired. I was administrator of the 2 community health centers, Southside and Dodson Avenue Community Health Centers, and have been very, very active in the community. I am very proud of having been the administrator at the health centers, because I was able to help a lot of people who looked like me, and worked with physicians also who looked like me. I define social justice as equity, anything that impacts our lives, especially thinking about how we came to America. I can't help but think about the equity, and we've gone through, it was 100 years from the time of the Civil War ending until 1965, when we did begin to see social justice. But now we're seeing a recycling of how things were back in the early 60s. And I think it's always interesting to let people know and to inform them that after the Civil War in 1865, it was still very difficult for African Americans. And by 1910, all of the southern states had Jim Crow laws, and those laws really had a really negative impact on us, and that is why we saw so many of our people migrating north, so that they would not have to deal with the segregation issues, the lynchings and things that continued to go on. And I came along, I was probably a year younger than Emmett Till, so I can never forget that. And I was a member of the Howard High School class of 1960, and we started the civil rights movement here in Chattanooga, and we were the only high school in the nation to be involved in protest, because we did not have a college here, but we had a high school. And so the others, in like John Lewis and Diane in Nashville, they had Fisk University and Tennessee State and other colleges, but we were a high school class. Well, it has a really very high impact on social justice, because if you don't deal with diversity, then you will not have any semblance of having had social justice. Well, I think that he would probably be very, very supportive of all of those issues. However, if he were alive today, he would also have to face the situations that we are faced with, dealing with gentrification and homelessness, because those were not social issues when he was alive.
I'm Ronald Harris, husband of Rosalind Harris, father of Sharonda and Jaron Harris, and a proclaimer of the Word of God, native Chattanoogan. You know, that's actually a very broad topic, and it's almost a coat of paint. We use it to define pretty much everything, but I think it's a combination of all the injustices, institutional, individual, that exist in our world and indeed in our country. I think it's all of those things that come together that creates an environment of inequality and inequity. When people are disproportionately treated wrong, if I can really say it that way. I think the social justice has been diluted to maybe one category, but I think it's every one of those things that keeps us from full participation in this system that we call democracy. Diversity is probably a misnomer. I don't really use that word a whole lot. I absolutely have nothing to do with diversity. If you have two of anything, you have diversity. I think more importantly is this area that we call inclusion, because all the voices, when we're inclusive, then all the voices that need to be heard are at the table, and in at those tables where injustice, inequality, and equity starts, diversity and inclusion and cultural competency lends a voice to those conversations where people have been systemically excluded. So it's incredibly important. I'm a firm believer that if you're not at the table, you're on the table. And so it becomes vitally important that all the voices are heard at any particular time on any particular subject, particularly those subjects around inequality, exclusivity, inequity, and all of those ingredients that maintains the status quo. Diversity and inclusion lends voice to that. I think Dr. King would be involved in every one of those issues, because the exclusion of every of those issues indicate that there are those that are more important or less important than the other. Dr. King, throughout his history, talked about the whole person. Many times people just talk about the last part of his speech, about the content of our character and so on. But Dr. King was immersed in every aspect of human life. He knew that one couldn't exist without the other. It's also scriptural, in that if you just have an eye, what about the hand? What about the ear? All of these things make us whole. And Dr. King understood that. I don't recall in any reading nor in any other type of media that I've seen with Dr. King did he exclude anyone and any component that lessened our humanity.
I'm Franklin McCauley, born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Lived here much of my life. Was away for a while, came back. I'm an English teacher by trade, high school principal, public high school principal, as a matter of fact, and enjoying being back in my hometown. I think when we look at social justice or justice in our society, we don't see that for black people. See it for white people, we don't see it for black people. White people have never allowed full justice in our society for black people. I think it is born of the terrible situation of slavery. I think when we came out right out of slavery, first 10, well, it wasn't even 2 years before the KKK was born, because those guys didn't want black people to have justice in our society. Then we came on up to Plessy versus Ferguson, 1898, and said separate but equal. Things will be separate but equal in their education. And so ruined us again. And as long as we hold the separate as equal, separate but equal, we will not have justice for black folk because white people won't allow it. What we should have said was equality for all, opportunity for all, the ability to work hard and get there and have the basics for all. But when you give more money to education for white kids than black kids, when you give the old textbooks from white schools to black schools, which we did in Chattanooga, when we keep people from having the kinds of jobs and the kinds of opportunities to move up in those jobs, that's not equality. That's separate but equal. And it was never equal when we were separate. Diversity can make it all work out. I'm back to the separate but equal. When we were separated, white people did not see black people as having any abilities. When you put people together, one of the things my wife and I have tried to do is to bring black and white people together in the city. We've had 1,600 people come through our home in Chattanooga Connected so that black people and white people could talk on an even level. And white people looked at us and said, I never knew black people like that. What they were saying was they didn't know black people had the ability that they heard, didn't have the intelligence, didn't have the savoir-faire, didn't have what those of us who have been black and white together understood. We need to continue that. Separate but equal is no good. Well, Dr. King would want to speak to all of them. But I think two of the ones that he would speak to, voting rights. We got to vote for the right people in. We can't keep voting people in who do not understand. We can't keep voting white people in who do not understand the racial injustice, who say, well, they ought to work and get where they should. Well, black people were never given the opportunities in the first place. How do you get up where these people think you ought to? No, we got to vote. Second is poverty, housing. He'd be talking about poverty and housing. White people look at black. I've heard of white people looking at black houses and say, "No, guys, why don't they live any better?" Well, why don't they live any better? We know why they don't live any better. Because, in fact, they hadn't had the jobs and hadn't had the opportunities, hadn't had the education to get the jobs and to move on up. And when you're talking about moving up in the organization, you got to have some white people who understand there are black people who are not only capable, but if you give them the job, they'll rise to the occasion. And it would change the nature of this country if we could do it overnight. We need to. We need to do more. We need to get together. We need to see each other. We need to learn from each other. We need to respect each other. But that isn't separate but equal. We don't need to be separate.
My name is Chantel Respert, and I am a native of Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I was born and raised. On the playground is where I spent most of my days. Social justice to me is rooted in fairness. I would define it as the impartial or equitable treatment and extension of privileges and opportunities and rights for all of society, regardless of your background, your culture, your race, or any other factor that we can think of to separate us. Diversity helps to demonstrate social justice. And what I mean by that is that it could be argued that if we are all the same, then there's already equality and parity. Diversity in its simplest terms means differences, right? So this idea that we're all different and unique shouldn't impede or hinder opportunities that we have to progress and succeed, however we define that, for ourselves or for the communities as a whole. I was not alive during Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s lifetime, but based upon what I have seen and what I've read, he already focused on many of the issues that still plague our society today, like poverty and racism, voting rights, and justice for all. I think that if he were alive today, then maybe our country and our society as a whole, we would have had a reckoning with racism instead of what we now have, where our leaders are revisionist historians loudly and proudly attacking the truth of racism and its impact. If he were alive today, our society as a whole, and Black people in particular, wouldn't have this identity crisis that we have now, where we're really struggling to define who we are and honor our differences. We need to uphold the freedoms that he and many others died to protect.
My name is Stacy Lightfoot, originally from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and proud to work at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga as the Vice Chancellor for Access and Engagement. I have a soon-to-be 14-year-old son, Dallas, and very happy to be in my hometown, in my community, making an impact in the world of education. Social justice is the recognition of systemic inequities and injustices that people face based on factors such as race, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and other identity markers. It's this idea that that we need to create a society that provides equal access to opportunities and resources, so that people can live with respect and dignity. Whoa, diversity is such a politically charged word these days. And when I think of diversity, I think of all of the differences that we bring to the table. And as it relates to social justice, those differences have impacted the lives of many people. And those are facts, that marginalized groups of people, marginalized, disenfranchised groups of people don't have the same access to opportunities in ways that some of their counterparts will have. And so when I think of diversity, I think of this broad representation of those differences and how embracing diversity, equity, inclusion, and really focusing on the equitable piece Ensuring that those resources are fairly distributed to all groups is what I think diversity and social justice have to do with each other. And I think you need that broad representation to dismantle stereotypes and dismantle these systems of oppression. And I think once we recognize what those differences are and understanding what the root causes of some of these challenges are, the more we're able to create a more fair and more just society for everyone. If Dr. King was alive today, there are many social justice topics I believe his platform and his activism would support, and that includes immigration policies, that includes health disparities, that includes voting rights, and ensuring that people have equal access and opportunities to participate in the democratic process. When I think of what Dr. Martin Luther King stood for, it was equal access. And it is fair to say, and I think there's so many examples currently that we can point to that speak to many of those inequities, including the mass incarceration of Black men. There's so many statistics that exist that proves how the system unfairly targets our Black and brown men. There have been books written, there have been researchers who've done years and years of research on some of these topics. I believe that what Martin Luther King stood for during the civil rights era and the civil rights movement are some of the same challenges that we're facing and we're fighting today. It doesn't feel the same because it looks a little different, but if you dig into the root cause, those problems still exist in many of our communities.
I have a dream.
I have a dream.
I have a dream.
I have a dream.
I have a dream.